Hi everyone, welcome. We're over here at my computer. I'm checking out my tracking spreadsheet to look at some of the information pertaining to the bins that I've got lined up for today. This is my tracker. Basically shows that here today is the date, 0 days countdown. So this is stuff counting backwards. Sometimes I have stuff in future dates already lined up, building a little bit of a schedule. I go on and off with doing that sometimes, but right now it's a very short-term schedule that I built yesterday. Pointing to today, the work needing to get done is some nondescript activity happening to these two systems over here. Basically, they're the two systems that track back to, can kind of almost tell on the tracking spreadsheet, but you can also tell 54 is the line number of what used to be the outdoor worm bag, from which we took all of the harvested castings, the worm population, and tried to process it all down. Part of it ended up being what we considered to be the finished castings out of the system, plus what was expected to be a bunch of cocoons inhabiting that material, and even baby worms too, little tiny ones. So over this past 80 days, this kind of cocoon nursery, which I also indicate with kind of like a little pattern to the lines. Sometimes you can see a little pattern on some of these lines over here, very faint, indicates that those are kind of a little different, and they're what I refer to as cocoon nurseries. Plus, this bin right here is one that actually is where the worms came to after we emptied out the outdoor worm bag, and those worms been running in this system here for a while outdoors and for a while inside of what I refer to as my small green tray, but now they're in their regular container. And those are the two systems I'm checking in on today. At day 80, I believe that this cocoon nursery's time has come to be finalized. You could see it was already running a horizontal migration starting 29 days ago, and the food in that horizontal feeding zone was fed a number of times. And even one time 2 weeks ago, we've already done our first haul out of worms from that system and added them to this other bin. And today I believe we're doing the second and final haul out, at which point we're going to consider this as really a batch of finished castings, depopulated of worms, and it'll be marked off as done over here on the tracker. So I'm going to head down there now, grab some food on my way from the refrigerator to do this with, and we'll regroup down there. So right here you see what the worms are getting. It's usually what I need to be getting rid of is what they're getting, and in this case what I need to be getting rid of is a few days worth of used coffee from the coffee machine. And just to spice things up a little bit, there's a banana in here as well. So it's going to be starting out with the cocoon nursery. It's right down here on the ground. It's the only container that you see that doesn't have a sticker on it. So it's not really like one that I consider as sort of an active bin for whatever reason. I don't know. Just in terms of it not having a label. And then once we extract the last of the worms out of there and treat that as just a finished batch of vermicompost, the baby worms and the coffee, everything's going to end up coming into our 80-day-old worm bin. I don't know. To me, it's 75 days according to the tracking, only because the worms did not go directly in here. They went into something else for a short period of time before they were introduced to what I consider to be a fresh new environment. And that's, to me, in my mind, sort of the starting point of any bin. So that's the reason this is considered as 75 days old today, and the cocoon nursery 80. So whatever, that's just the tracking method that I've been using. You do whatever works for you. So let me get a glove on and we'll get to work here. So I've got the cocoon nursery out here on the bench, and the little plastic tray I have here in my hand is what we did the last haul out with, I think. And I think it was a little bit of a tight squeeze, getting everything that we wanted to pile into this box in here, and I think I might have even reflected on how it might have been a good idea to use something larger. I'm going to kind of ignore that lesson learned from last time and give it a go one more time with this container, which might be a little bit small. This paper is just falling apart. I like the idea of bringing these isopods over into the red wiggler bin once we get the red wigglers out of here and relocated. Be kind of nice to have these helper creatures go with the worms. It's kind of cool that I can sort of reintroduce the isopods back into my worm bins, because for some time now they've been absent from my systems down here in my wormery for some reason. So I'm looking forward to having them back. I'm sure we'll see a few more. We'll see if we can snatch them up and recruit them along with the worms. So our worm recruits at this point should be in our little bait traps that we set down the middle. I'm thinking, what I was actually thinking was sort of inspecting the flanks first, just to see if our our baiting of the worms out of the material has succeeded. So in my mind, it seemed like if the material on either side was relatively worm free, then we're done here. We've succeeded in migrating the last of the worms out. But if there's still worms occupying this stuff out here, maybe I should actually allow it to continue on for a little while longer. So if we start bumping into tons of worms out here, then that'll be what we end up doing. But besides placing foods down in here, you might have noticed that piece of wood was also the only thing covering the center of the bin, where there was a lot of moisture recirculating right beneath that piece of wood, since the water couldn't evaporate through it. Everywhere else on the outside, the material out here on the sides has been left to dry. So the idea there was to make the middle the more damp section of the bin where all the worms would be drawn to, and then once they're in that area, drawn to the moisture, they'd sense the food supply being nearby right in the middle and make their way over there, and then hopefully remain there so they can be scooped out and relocated. Now I'm kind of burning through here. Hopefully I'm not skimming right past a whole bunch of worms that we're trying to evacuate out of this material, but I think this process going this way for so long, I think we're probably, I think even last time we sort of sensed that this was nearing its end. Last time we did a little bit of a tilling up of the material, and then shot a little bit of time lapse of this tilled up material, as if we were to just glance at this for a while, for about 10 minutes, just to see if we can notice any movement of any worms that might have been occupying any of this material. But I don't think I see anything. No signs of life yet. But once we get down into the middle where we've been trying to bait the worms to, hopefully we'll see what remains of whatever worms were still in this bin, all collected up into the little trays that we set out for them with food and moisture. And then hopefully we'll be done. We'll have this beautiful batch of castings to add to our collection. What's underneath this cardboard is the baiting trap. I had used the cardboard to try to prevent all this casting material from flowing in there and getting all mixed together with the food and the bait, so that the only stuff that's happening underneath this cardboard here is the baiting station. So I just hope it wasn't something that would kind of prevent a worm from finding it or making its way down where it wants to be. But I don't know, worms are pretty resourceful when it comes to that stuff, so I probably didn't have to worry too much for their sake. So right away we're greeted with at least one worm here. I saw a baby worm out here too near the surface. Maybe not such a baby. I thought I saw a much smaller one before. We got a lot more worms in here than when we saw when we checked in here a week ago. Last time we didn't even add food to this. We just picked through here a little bit, checking out what was happening, and saw a few worms moving about in here, but it didn't seem like quite that many. Definitely not as many as I'm seeing today. So as I look through here, you could see there's just worms all over the place throughout this stuff. And all these castings are clear evidence of that as well, and the absence of food. Here's the stem of a banana. A little portion of the food that was put in there to try to lure them over there. This might be a part of the banana peel. But I got a feeling our little baiting and trapping area worked quite well. So I'm going to try to also excavate right beneath. Let's see if we can get this piece of paper out of our way. I'm going to excavate a little bit right below here. So we're going to be sort of robbing ourselves of some of these finished castings from our finished castings collection. But we are trying to get the last of the worms out of here, right? So let's just inspect some of these really fine castings that are resting right below where the feeding and baiting area was. There's going to be a bunch of worms in it, and hopefully they're worms big enough that we can spot them and then extract them. Because once we're done here, I'd really like to consider this as just a finished batch of castings, although I did have a little trick in mind for the end there, so it might not be so crucial that we get every last worm out of here, because I did think that it might be a good idea to take a half of that banana, or maybe not even a half, but a portion of that banana that I bought down here to feed with, and leave it in here for these little guys. Even though, you know, technically we're going to consider this bin as done in my tracking system, I'll still sort of track it in a more idle way and show its status as not available and ready for use as another worm bin, but storing castings, storing finished castings, which is something that some of my bins sort of end up doing for little periods of time after they're done with a run, but are no longer requiring any more maintenance or attention. So this tray will no longer be housing an active worm farming situation, but it'll just be serving sort of a storage purpose. So I think we actually did a really good job locating all the little worms that were hanging out right below our feeding area. And I guess the whole idea with a worm nursery like this is that all you've really got in here is theoretically worms that were hatched in here, ones that are still relatively juvenile and not yet old enough to be leaving behind cocoons. So theoretically the population of this system is not of breeding age yet, so the expectation of further more cocoons in this material being possible additional worms that could be eventually hauled out of here at some point in the future, I think that that's, you know, really been reduced, minimized significantly. So really beautiful stuff. Yeah, let's do our little banana trick there, right? Let's grab a little chunk of this banana that we were going to feed to the other system, and I'll just hack off the tip of it, because a little chunk of banana like this should be plenty for the job, right? If we leave this behind, there's a little treat to try to lure in any last few worms that got left behind with this haul out, so we can round them up at some point in the future. But you know, we're not going to treat this as you know, a migration geared feeding. We're just going to consider this bin as complete at this point. So I'm sure there's plenty of worms still hanging out here. All I would have to do is brush some material aside and I'll spot one. So I guess maybe I could do another minute or two of that, or is it a waste of time? We've got the banana staying behind to do this for us. So why don't we leave it at that? We'll leave it right in the middle because that's probably where the majority of the worms are going to be. And then they'll be able to zero in on this yummy morsel a lot more easily. Level things off. Yeah, there's got to be some worms remaining in this, but probably not too many. So over here in the middle, doesn't need to be a really deep ditch. I'd like it to have it kind of near the surface, and we'll grab a little chunk of paper used previously as sort of a some of those top covering sheets of paper. We'll just use this as a little bit of a landing pad here, so we've got something a little bit more defined to look for when we come back in here, because maybe that'll be pretty heavily eaten if there were a lot of worms left behind. And at least we'll have that piece of paper to zero in on and confirm that we've checked the right spot. But it's right smack in the middle. Should be pretty easy enough. And who knows, maybe at some point in the future I'll check on this without even bringing the camera down here with me, or when I'm down here doing other things. So this could be the very last time you ever see this beautiful batch of castings. If I succeed in rounding up a few more worms out of here, you know where they'll be going, and that's to the next bin that we're gonna go check in on and feed and release worms into, and reuse a lot of this paper in as well. All right, let's get that one out here next. Here we've got the 75-day-old bin that we're going to release worms into, and we're going to feed. Usually we'll feed first so we can take care of all that disruption before placing the new worms in. Last time we were in here, I do remember covering up pretty thoroughly with this piece of plastic. I thought I had set out for myself to come back down in here at some point and kind of pull the edges of that plastic back a bit to reduce the coverage, but it does look like this thing was pretty much covered edge to edge for the past week. So that really did cause a lot of moisture to circulate in all parts of the bin, even on the outer edges where sometimes you don't see quite as much, since we're pulling the plastic coverings back sometimes to expose the outer edges to some extra airflow. I do like seeing a lot of moisture sometimes. I think the worms like it. Right here. They're hanging out on this piece of paper. 3 or 4 of them. It's good to look at these little guys and see a little yellow tail, except on that guy, though. Questioning whether that's really a red wiggler, especially because of its speed. Because I've got blue worms, and I feel like they've been kind of wandering, lurking out of their bin and ending up in places where they don't really belong. And this I had intended to be a red wiggler bin, but I am starting to get that sensation like we might have some invaders in here. It seems like such a chore to, try to keep your eye out for worms that don't really belong in a particular bin, but I've already kind of started into doing it anyway. I guess if I keep spotting blue worms in any of my other systems, I'll relocate them. I'm pretty sure it is, because I guess the distinct yellow tail is also not present on this little guy, which is another trait of the red wiggler. See that little bright spot on the end of the tail? It's kind of another telltale of what kind of worm you're looking at. So let me get rid of this little guy. I'll be right back. Alright, so fear not, I put that little guy over into the container that I know that I've got blue worms in, and the only container that I should have blue worms in. But it does seem like I'm kind of dealing with something that a lot of people have talked about on other worm channels and worm dialogue comments, that these blue worms are the type that like to just take off and crawl into other bins and take over, sort of. So I think a bin of this age, 80 days old, you know, normally I would probably still be into putting fresh leaf coverings. You know, I'd probably normally just pull out my box that I've got all the leaves in, but right now I know that my box is empty, so I don't have any leaves to use as cover today. So I think just in the interest of having some material to cover up with at the end to let this bin look kind of natural, let's try to preserve some of this leafy material to cover up with at the end, just for cosmetic purposes. These are some of the pieces of cardboard tube that the bin was originally built out of. And, you know, after a couple months in service, you would like to start thinking that these bits of cardboard are going to get worked down eventually. So let's see how the last feeding from a week ago is holding up. We fed avocado, so there were 2 halves of an avocado placed in here. And with avocado, I think like I mentioned in last week's video when we first put this food in here, it does seem like my experiences with it are a little bit hot and cold, so to speak. So sometimes it seems like the worms go bananas for the avocado, other times it seems like not so much. We'll see what happens with that. Maybe it's just not been in here for long enough. Maybe it'll build up some momentum once it's been in the bin for a little bit longer. But at this point it classifies as leftover food, I guess. And it's hard to say that the bin needs more food when you look at all this leftover avocado. But, you know, if there's something about it that the worms are not able to eat, or if it just needs more time to get to that broken down stage where the worms can begin taking advantage of it, then, you know, I do feel like it makes good sense to make sure they've got other things to eat in here other than those things that might not really even be ready for worm consumption quite yet. So they're getting coffee and the better part of a banana. So let's just pick around down here a little bit more. I don't want to go too crazy ripping stuff up here, but I am curious to see how things look underneath the feeding area. I can see worms of all different sizes. Even with that last haul out of worms from the worm cocoon nursery, you know, we brought over a bunch of baby worms. I think on this go around too we're going to be bringing over a bunch of baby worms as well. So it is kind of nice to see, you know, a variety of different sizes of worms, large and small. I just keep craving a hot spot, kind of finding a little ball of worms hanging out enjoying one particular something. But I think in this case we might just have, you know, the worm population spread out throughout the bin right now, because there really might not have been anything that they could really get jazzed about to collect around. Maybe there's just something about these avocados that just make them not ready for prime time yet. And these little things that you see in here are the discs. These little, well, they're shaped like discs, I guess, but they're slices of the pits that came out of the avocados. So instead of putting the avocado pit in here whole, these were all sliced up and chunked into little pieces, also thrown in here with the avocados, and they'll go in time. But they're only a week old being in here. Soon they'll start softening up and breaking apart and becoming worm food. So let's get today's feeding in here. It might seem like kind of a boring meal for these little guys. Just a bunch of coffee. And, you know, I think you're right. Maybe a little something to dress this boring coffee meal up a bit would be nice. I did bring down some scrap pieces of used paper. There's even a fortune out of a fortune cookie in here. I figured we'd try to put this paper towel to good use too in here as maybe some extra supplementary bedding. I've got a few pieces of that we can throw in here. You can just put paper all over the place. Coffee filters are paper. Paper towels that we're putting in between the coffee is all paper. Let's give them some grit too, I suppose. Wouldn't be a bad idea. I could polish off what's left in this container here and get myself a reload. And let's not forget the main course, this yummy banana. This should hopefully trigger some mob behavior in the worms, or at least I hope it does. Hope they enjoy it. So we'll put that out here on top. And hopefully next time we come in here, we'll find a whole bunch of happy worms enjoying that. As well as what's left over here. Let's get their leftovers repositioned back down in the feeding area too. Hopefully this avocado starts becoming something that they like and can eat soon. But let me see, are we done here? Can we start covering up this feeding area? I think we're done. I don't know, is that enough? All that paper. Yeah, I think we're good. Just that lately I've been sort of on a kick to be really generous with the bedding, but I think this bin's in pretty good shape when it comes to bedding, so we won't worry about it. Partially because of the feeding, I already incorporated some good bedding, and there's all this really great bedding here too that is coming along with the relocated worms. This is just some of that stuff, that paper that was sitting out on the top of that cocoon nursery that we can also lay down in here as part of the feeding. And you know, I guess we could try to remove some of this excess stuff. There's definitely a lot of surplus bedding coming along with these little worms that we've relocated out of their cocoon nursery. We could see worms hanging out all over this stuff here, little ones. And that's pretty much what we were expecting. We're expecting to find little worms coming together in our cocoon nursery, ones that hatched out of the left behind cocoons. There's some leftover food too, banana peel. And here we go, we're bringing the isopods over too. I almost forgot about them. The roly-polies. But you know what? Look at all those worms. Yeah, we got a good haul here. Before I release these little guys, I'm trying to give ourselves a little bit of a view of how many we collected here, because we do always try to come up with a rough estimate of how many worms we think we're releasing in one of these worm releases. So based on what you've seen here, I know it's not a terrific view, but based on this limited view of what we've managed to collect up here, please give me your guesses as to how many worms we're releasing here in this little miniature worm release. We'll get one more look at them when we finally release them, but before we do, my idea here was to cover this up a little bit better now and then proceed to the releasing once the bin is pretty much in its put away state, and then we can just cover up and put it back up on the shelf once the worms have gotten themselves situated in their new home here. So what do we got here? We got a couple more covers here. We'll put this cover down the middle to show where we just fed all that coffee. That'll be our feeding zone indicator. And I've got some other pieces of paper over there on the side, as well as the plastic to put back on here. And I think we'll put the plastic back on a little bit more loosely when we do, because I think we've got pretty good moisture in here. I don't think we have to force it to be as efficient as it had been over the past week. So it worked good. It worked just the way we wanted it to. So let's proceed to the release of these little guys. All right. So once again, I'll be turning to you to see what you think. So be sure to enter a comment to let me know how many worms you think we just managed to collect and release here today. Let's spread them out. And that's worms. So give me the estimate on how many worms you think there are here, not how many isopods. All right, let's let these little guys get situated in their new home. So after a while, the only things you see moving on the surface are the isopods. All the worms appear to have retreated down into the material. So the only thing remaining is to cover up. Indicate here with the coffee filter where we last fed, and then start bringing in some of the paper that is draped over the top of that. Stuff that the worms were pretty content to be kind of attached to and hanging out on and crawling around on. And I think it was because of the amount of moisture that had collected on this stuff from the plastic coverings being as thoroughly applied as they were from edge to edge all the way around. It looks like we've torn a large hole into the center of our top cover paper, which means maybe this top cover paper will be used as bedding in future feeding. Future feeding soon. So, I don't know. What do you think? 80-day bin. I think the original estimate based on the initial setup of the bin with the initial haul out of worms and loading of worms in here, plus the most recent addition of worms. I don't even remember what the running estimate of how many worms are in here stands at. Maybe 1,900? Could I be wrong about that? I forget. But either way, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. How many worms did we just release here? If you have an idea on that, please write it in the comments below. I look forward to seeing it. And as for the video, that's it. That's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please, as always, remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.